It was April 18th in the year 1521 that Martin Luther, the chief catalyst of Protestantism, defies the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V by refusing to recant his writings. He'd been called to Worms, Germany, to appear before the Diet, Assembly of the Holy Roman Empire, and answer charges of heresy. Martin Luther was a professor of biblical interpretation at the University of Wittenberg in Germany. In 1517, he drew up his 95 Theses condemning the Catholic Church for its corrupt practice of selling indulgences or forgiveness of sin. Luther followed up the revolutionary work with equally controversial and groundbreaking theological works, and his fiery words set off religious reformers across Europe. In 1521, the Pope excommunicated him, and he was called to appear before the emperor at the Diet of Worms to defend his beliefs. Refusing to recant or rescind his positions, Luther was declared an outlaw and a heretic. Powerful German princes protected him, however, and by his continuance of eternity in 1546, his ideas had significantly altered the course of Western thought. It was April 18th in the year 1775 that British troops marched out of Boston on a mission to confiscate the American arsenal at Concord and to capture Patriot leaders Samuel Adams and John Hancock, known to be hiding at Lexington. As the British departed, Boston Patriots Paul Revere and William Dawes set out on horseback from the city to warn Adams and Hancock and to rouse the Minutemen. By 1775, tensions between the American colonies and the British government had approached the breaking point, especially in Massachusetts, where Patriot leaders formed a shadow revolutionary government and trained militias to prepare for armed conflict with the British troops occupying Boston. In the spring of 1775, General Thomas Gage, the British governor of Massachusetts, received instructions from Great Britain to seize all stores of weapons and gunpowder accessible to the American insurgents. On April 18th, he ordered British troops to march against Concord and Lexington. The Boston Patriots had been preparing for such a British military action for some time, and upon learning of the British plan, Revere and Dawes set off across the Massachusetts countryside. They took separate routes in case one of them was captured. Dawes left the city via the Boston Neck Peninsula, and Revere crossed the Charles River to Charlestown by boat. As the two couriers made their way, Patriots in Charlestown waited for a signal from Boston informing them of the British troop movement. As previously agreed, one lantern would be hung in the steeple of Boston's Old North Church, the highest point in the city, if the British were marching out of the city by Boston Neck. And two lanterns would be hung if they were crossing the Charles River to Cambridge. Two lanterns were hung, and the armed Patriots set out for Lexington and Concord accordingly. Along the way, Revere and Dawes roused hundreds of Minutemen who armed themselves and set out to oppose the British. Revere arrived in Lexington shortly before Dawes, but together they warned Adams and Hancock and then set out for Concord. Along the way, they were joined by Samuel Prescott, a young patriot who had been riding home after visiting a lady friend. Early on the morning of April 19th, a British patrol captured Revere, and Dawes lost his horse, forcing him to walk back to Lexington on foot. However, Prescott escaped and rode onto Concord to warn the Patriots there. After being roughly questioned for an hour or two, Rivera was released when the patrol heard Minutemen alarm guns being fired on their approach to Lexington. About 5 a.m. on April 19th, 700 British troops under Major John Pitcairn arrived at the town to find a 77-man strong colonial militia under Captain John Parker waiting for them on Lexington's Common Green. Pitcairn ordered the outnumbered Patriots to disperse, and after a moment's hesitation, the Americans began to drift off the green. Suddenly, the shot heard around the world was fired from an undetermined gun, and a cloud of musket smoke soon covered the green. When the brief Battle of Lexington ended, a handful of Americans had continued their eternity, and several others were wounded. The American Revolution had officially begun. It was April 18th in the year 2014 that 16 Nepali mountaineering guides, most of them ethnic Sherpas, meet with an avalanche on Mount Everest. They continue their eternity as a result. It was the single deadliest accident in the history of the Himalayan peak, which rises more than 29,000 feet above sea level and lies across the border between Nepal and China. The avalanche, which occurred around 6:30 a.m., swept over the Sherpas in a notoriously treacherous area of Everest known as the Khumbu Icefall at approximately 19,000 feet. At the time, the Sherpas had been hauling loads of gear for commercial expedition groups. The disaster, in which no foreigners took serious injury, reopened debates about the dangerous risk undertaken by Sherpas for their typically affluent clients. In addition to lugging most of the supplies for an expedition, Sherpas are responsible for such tasks as setting lines of fixed ropes and ladders for climbers, as well as the over-commercialization of Everest, where human traffic jams during the spring mountaineering season and massive amounts of litter had become common. In 1953, New Zealander Edmund Hillary and Sherpa Tenzing Norgay became the first people to officially reach the summit of Everest, which the British named in 1865 for George Everest, a Welsh-born surveyor general of India. Andrew Waugh, his successor as Surveyor General, chose the mountain's moniker. It's unlikely George Everest ever saw the peak named in his honor. Meanwhile, the Nepalese refer to the mountain as Sagarmatha, while Tibetans call it Chomolungma, and the Chinese know it as Zumyolangma, Zumyolangma Thang. Since Hillary and Norgay's historic achievement, more than 4,000 people have scaled Everest, while at least several hundred others have continued their eternity in the process. In 1996, 8 climbers were caught in a storm on the mountain and continued their eternity, as chronicled in the best-selling book Into Thin Air by Jon Krakauer. That season, a total of 15 people continued their eternity on Everest, making it the deadliest season until 2014. In the aftermath of the April 18th tragedy, a number of Sherpas boycotted the remainder of the climbing season out of respect for the 16 guides who continued their eternity, and also to protest such issues as the pay and treatment of the Sherpas. As a result, many commercial expedition companies opted to cancel their planned ascents.